There you go. Okay.
A number of years ago, I looked at normal parachute flies and I said to myself that it didn't quite really match the imprint of a bug on the water. So, I mean, as a law of averages, most of a bug on the water's imprint, other than their body and their tail, is sort of out to the sides, right? Like, yeah, they have two tiny little forelegs that make a couple little dimples in the water, but, you know, most of their imprint, especially if their wings are on the water, I mean, a parachute's kind of imitating a spinner, right? Most of that imprint is out to the side. So I started clipping a little V in the front of the parachute hackle. And that made me happy for a little while. But one drawback that I found to parachutes is that the whole body is sitting in the water. You know, by the time the hackle is actually holding that fly up, the whole rest of the fly is already wet. I mean, yeah, on your first cast, maybe the body's only depressing the surface tension, but very shortly it starts absorbing water. The fly gets harder to lift up off the water. So I wanted to come up with a way of hackling a fly that left less of an impression out in front of the eye of the hook, so the hackle fibers weren't laying right on the water, and also pushed a few of the hackle fibers down even with or slightly below the body of the fly. So I played around for a couple of years, and eventually, you know, some of the methods were so difficult. I tried all methods of hackling that I could come across, the paraloop and the hackle stacker and all this stuff, and nothing really gave me exactly what I was after. And in the end, what I came across, or I mean, I haven't found any other references to it, so for now I guess I could say I invented it. It was like the simplest method that I tried by far. So I call it a paratrude because I'm not going to make a post. I'm going to tie a down wing or a trude, and I'm going to wrap the hackle around the base of the wing. That's it. Something I picked up from Oliver Edwards. I lick my fingers, hold the thread, and of course you can't see, but what I'm doing on my side is drawing the thread down so it's just a little stub. You still can't see it. Okay? So, pinch the thread against the hook, draw it down until there's less than the length of the body left in my hand, pinch it, and slip it out, because that never happens at home.
Only in front of others.
Yep. So I make like 2 wraps forward, start sliding my fingers back and wrap over it.
Is that the same thread? Is that what you're using?
Yep.
He's Scotch.
Yeah.
That is correct.
It also saves having to cut. Saves scissors, yeah.
Yeah, it saves a tying step, and I mean, if you think about it, okay, yeah, spool of thread's $1. Every single fly you tie, you trim off 2 inches of thread. How many inches of thread do you think you actually use in the tying of the whole fly?
Rick, where do you work?
What does that have to do with it?
He's only getting $9.99 an hour or something.
Yeah, I'm not trying to sell more stuff. I'm trying to be easier on my budget.
He's got a kid now.
My point is, it adds up.
How much you actually push on that 380 that drives me crazy.
That's what they all say, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Where's Kenzie tonight?
Taking care of it.
Didn't make it, she says, she's sorry everybody. See you soon.
I'm going to do a quick little hand stack here with my moose hair.
If you use 2 inches of thread on each fly, which is possible, and you just save 2 inches, you just doubled your output.
For my own tying, as sort of an average, I would say I use between 8 and 10 inches of thread per fly.
Per 8 and 10 inches
Yep.
per fly.
So you're saving 20 to 25% of your spool of thread?
That seems a good extreme, maybe.
I'll bet you he puts 8 inches just wrapping the hook.
I'm glad you shared that, because I still clip off that 3 or 4 millimeter.
It's I think most of them do.
Okay.
But it's good to be frugal.
Rick, what are you dressing shank right now?
That's a moose body hair for a tail.
There must be better materials for tails, right?
Such as?
I just remember a long argument about a year ago.
Yeah. Well, as I recall, that argument was that somebody could catch more fish with any fly.
He's doing the tail, you can see it now.
Ah,
So just because of the background, this is
Well,
black
Yeah,
on
you
black.
can turn the bib apron around and.
What was this again, Rick? You were saying about what?
somebody claimed that they could catch more fish using any fly with any tail material or even no tail at all.
Who was that?
I can't recall.
It seems to me there was a coffee bet on that or something. wasn't
Yeah, I
there?
think there was. There you
Did it ever happen?
go. Nope.
Well, I think we had to find that guy and get that to happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably him.
If you run across him, let me know.
I'll put a whisper in his ear.
Coincidentally, that same guy spoke on that matter to me tonight.
I
Those.
thought it was a particular fly too, wasn't it?
It was, in fact.
Would this be the same guy that told you he could teach me how to tie a parachute in like one sitting?
I believe so.
Oh.
He said that?
Was he able to do that, Dusty? No.
No, well, I haven't sat with him yet to, learn a parachute. I should.
I'll talk to him again.
What W are you?
This is muskrat.
What's that?
Natural muskrat?
You bet.
An Alberta muskrat?
As a matter of fact, it is.
Self-kill?
Roadkill.
From what time of year?
Couldn't tell you that.
Spring or fall muskrat?
Now, with this method, I find it helpful when you get up to the winging point to try to make a couple of sort of diagonal wraps, lower at the bottom, sloping back at the top.
Gotta save the dubbing too.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. The next time you're tying a fly and your thread runs out before you're finished, you're going to think back and go, maybe I should have tried that one.
Maybe you should check the bobbin first before he starts.
Okay, one of the few materials that Dave didn't mention as a wing or posting materials, one of my favorites, snowshoe hare's foot.
I was going to ask you about that.
Okay,
So you're using that for a wing then?
that's right.
I just find snowshoe hair really makes the boat to tie anybody.
I find it's very soft and it's very hard to build a post on it.
I'm not building a post.
But he's not building a post, so.
Just to get it bound on the hook, I find it's very.
Now, on that topic, Rick,
Yeah.
how about snowshoe hair for caddis flies
Mm-hmm.
instead of deer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't tie my caddis with deer anymore.
So do you do,
I don't tie with deer either. That's the hair between the toes.
so you do the wabbit,
Right foot.
wabbit hair caddis now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The wabbit hair.
Wascally
I
wabbit.
don't know how he holds
Sorry?
that.
Wascally wabbit.
The wascally wabbit.
Okay, now
I don't know how he holds that.
Anyway.
for the snowshoe,
You're hunting wabbits.
for the snowshoe hair, most people will tie it in by,
Down a little.
sort of on the middle because they like getting the tapered ends. You can see what a fluffy kind of mess that's going to make, right? And also, the fibers at the ends are the part that's actually being walked on every day by the rabbit. So Those parts are kind of damaged. They actually do soak up a little bit of water. They don't float all that great. Probably see it better with the black. There's a little bit of color. Maybe the color doesn't show up great on here. Towards the tips, even in dyed colors, the tips have a little bit more just natural tint in them, a little bit more color. You can make your wing a little bit more visible, tying it in with the butt end facing up, but the very base of it seems to make the smallest tie-in point. So what I typically do is tie it in as close to the very base as I can, and then trim the wing to length. That way I'm avoiding the damaged hairs and still getting a pretty good amount of visibility on it.
And you would think that the tips of the hairs would be the toughest ones, toughest part of the hair, because that's what's on the ground.
Right.
So tying it in with the toughest part makes good sense that way as well.
They're also pretty slippery though. They make, using a small amount like this, it's not that hard to tie it in, but it does make a slightly bulkier tie-in point. And then I'm trimming it off basically in the middle. And the part of the wing that has the best water repellent properties is at the base. So I like to use as much of the base as I can. And I'm fine with trimming it right now. And I might as well trim it at a bit of an angle, just to make it look a little bit more like an actual wing. And that might be ever so slightly short, but I don't care.
What do you use as the base for your, how do you measure your wing post?
Well, it's not a post.
Well, sorry, how do you measure your wing?
Basically, I want my wing to be approximately the same length as the body.
Okay.
And that's closer than I thought, really.
Awesome.
I mentioned during the beginner's fly tying that I like to split rabbit's feet in half. It's relatively easy to do.
Hurts?
Well, they do scream, but I don't mind because I'm cold-hearted.
Okay.
So the sharper the knife, the better, and never cut towards yourself. Some people do it with a screwdriver. You can just make a mess doing it that way. So I'll slip it in between the two middle toes. I'll put the base of the foot down on the chair.
Make sure you want to cut the rabbits.
With the point of the knife facing at you guys.
That's okay, he's had his kid already.
And I'll just wiggle it.
So you just go.
And then you have access to all the good hair that you actually want. The hair on the outside here doesn't have the same properties. It's not really what you want to tie with. Makes good dubbing. And trying to, I have a few of these, trying to get a hold of that hair in the middle without splitting it, without trimming all the hair on the outside is pretty challenging, because you grab the little pinch you want and everything else just closes around your fingers, and trying to trim only that is tough. So, hackle. This should be probably a little long. I'm going to go a little shorter than him. That's better. And something I don't believe Dave mentioned, and you'll probably read about it, hear about it, is which way you tie on the feather. So people refer to shiny side and dull side. I think it's easier, more clear, if you can find references to concave and convex, provided you understand those terms. Basically, Yeah. Basically, the feather has, every single hackle feather has a natural shape. They cup one way. The fibers radiating out from the stem cup down towards the back. Some people prefer to tie it with that cup facing up, which kind of helps with the aerodynamics of the fly landing, keeps all those fibers out up above the fly like you like, and shows the stronger markings to the fish. Other people feel like you get more stiff support and slightly better flotation if you put it the other way with the fibers going down, and you're free to experiment, find which way you prefer. For this fly, the method itself is going to push some of those hackle fibers down. So you can experiment and see which way you like better. Frankly, I just don't concern myself with it anymore.
I'm with you. The modern genetic hackle, I don't think it matters.
Yeah. So I'm going to tie it at about a 45-degree angle on the far side of the wing, just in front of it. Tie down the hackle stem, bring the thread back, park it there. Now, just think about all those wraps forward to dam it up, get it to stand up vertically. Wrapping around, the time of getting that stem held, making your wraps around to mount it, all that I'm done. Take my hackle, I make one wind, pull the wing forward. I try to make my first wrap and leave a little gap below it. Pull the wing back, make my wrap in front, and that much stiffness that you've added is already enough. I try to make every subsequent wrap below the previous, and if you watch closely as you're wrapping, you'll notice some of the hackle fibers at the top kind of move as you're wrapping, and what's happening is you've reached the bottom, your hackle stem has hit the body of the fly, and your next wrap is actually going to push all those wraps up a little bit, so your first wrap starts to get pulled down underneath all of the following wraps. To me, that's the signal to stop. I'm going to hold the hackle fiber on the far side, wind my thread up until the bobbin touches, and without pulling down, I'm going to use the tip of the bobbin to push my hackle fibers out of the way and tie off my stem. That done. I like to kind of pull the stem back a little bit, because in tying that way I've pulled that hackle stem right down onto the side of the fly. And then the hackle fibers, for one thing, you get more on one side than the other, and they kind of point almost straight down. Don't really want that. So I pull it back against my wrapping so it's basically pointing straight forward and right on top of the hook. And slide in, and I'll use a sawing action to take that off. But I think it might have undone. It did.
Yeah. Never happens.
No.
I think you've got 8 inches of thread that you use just to tie in that
You could be right.
hackle.
You think it's that much?
No, it looks like it hung down a long ways.
Careful, Dave, you won't use 8 inches of thread.
Did you bring your measuring tape?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when I finish tying this fly, you can cut it apart, you can measure.
Oh, you bet.
Aren't you just putting the hackle back on?
The 1/2 inch of hackle that was left?
No, I'm not putting another new piece of hackle.
Yeah.
We're gonna redo that half.
Where's my trim bit? There's my trim bit. Okay. Strap, little gap, blowing back. And to make sure you're getting the second and third wrap underneath, you can pull the wing forward again. You can manipulate it around a little bit. You want to start a pool?
Nope, this one's gonna work.
Are you tying it off on the wing itself?
No, I'm not. And this time I'm not going to get fancy. Bob and drop? No! So, ankles tied in. And if you can see why I like to pull it back a little bit, because now I've got a few fibers. And where did I put my dubbing? Back in the bag. That's where I put it.
Aren't you in a sense making a post with your hackle?
You could say that.
I'm not gonna.
Would I get slapped for saying it?
Yep.
I feel the only stupid question is the one not asked.
That's exactly true. But what I'm going to do next kind of eliminates that. A little bit more dubbing to make a thorax. Reach in, pull the hackle and wing back. Dub at a bit of an angle so you overlap what you had before. Up to the eye. I can probably just leave that. Finish. Thread. And I'll just trim off the hackle fibers that I don't like. Now, everything's gone relatively well. And that wing is fairly well tied in. You can pull it back. You get the fibers to go down just a little bit more. Maybe, yeah, there we go. And you can see how about, well, almost perpendicular to the hook, they come about even with the body, and then everything behind that is starting to drop below. All of the fibers in the front are now canted up. When I first started doing this, I would actually come in and clip the fibers in front of the wing, but there's really no good reason to do that. I don't think it makes the fly helicopter or anything like that. So, and I find it to be a quicker and, when you're not showing your friends, easier way of tying a parachute. And if you want it to be a bit more of a traditional parachute, just give it a little work, pull it forward, stands up nice and straight for you. And in, you know, real life fishing, if you, because I've tied a down wing, but I've wrapped the hackle jammed under it, to some extent it kind of wants to stay as a bit of a down wing. That's sort of its natural position. So if you want to fish it, you know, with a little bit less of the hackle fibers touching the water, a little bit more vertical post. Every 5th cast or so you want to stop and give it a little tug. Of course that's not going to happen because you'll catch the fish by then.